This presentation is a discussion of SSH on Linux using OpenSSH, Active Directory for Windows. This presentation is done by Mark Mosley for ISA4220 class at Kennesaw State University in the spring 2016 semester. This presentation is done on March 20, 2016. We'll begin first with a technical discussion of SSH for Linux using OpenSSH. SSH stands for Secure Socket Shell. It serves as a secure protocol that allows remote logins and file transfers between computers or servers. SSH is the preferred method for remote logins. SSH interacts inside the Transmission Control Protocol, TCP, by sitting on top of the Transport Layer Protocol, the TLP. It utilizes three separate protocols for transport, authentication, and connection. For encryption, it utilizes the RSA encryption to establish secure end-to-end tunnels. RSA stands for Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman, the creators of this encryption method at RSA Data Security. The encryption keys are found by multiplying two large prime numbers together at random and deriving security keys from both of these numbers in the product. It allows for both public and private keys, and both keys can encrypt the data, but decrypting the data requires the opposite key. For a technical discussion of Active Directory for Windows, Active Directory is Microsoft's directory service. It provides a centralized and standard method for automating network management by providing a single point of control to reduce redundancy and errors for user data, security, and distributed resources. Active Directory is designed to work in networking environments. It is designed to be compatible with both older and newer versions. Everything that Active Directory tracks is considered to be an object. An object can be any user, system, resource, or service. Many objects can share the same attribute. And attributes are the properties within the object. So, for example, a user could have the attributes of username, full name, and description, and a system would have an attribute of hostname, IP address, and a location. So, when you talk about objects sharing common attributes, so if you have a system, my PC, it would share multiple users, so they all have the same attribute of users to one object of a system. A container is used to group sets of objects, so containers can be nested within other containers. So you have users John, Mark, and Bob belong to group 1, while Jane and Joe belong to group 2, and then they both can belong to a group users, administrators, or they can both belong to a certain computer. Continuing the technical discussion of Active Directory, it is controlled from the Active Directory users and computers MMC snap-in. Administrators have the ability to delegate management of objects, users, and containers to other administrators as needed. This is done through the Active Directory security model, where Active Directory maintains an access control list, ACL, of every object, user, and container. Active Directory uses multicast replication to replicate the Active Directory to multiple servers as needed. This prevents a single point of failure, which is critical since network domains rely on Active Directory for user login, security permissions, access rights, and other permissions as configured by the company. So if you only have one server with Active Directory running and that one server goes down, well then your entire system will come to a stop, because the second somebody tries to log into the network or access a new folder or file, there's no machine for them to check against, so they will not be able to log in or open that file or folder. Best practices for SSH are to set a strong password. Strong passwords prevent hackers from being able to compromise your secure tunnel networks and gain access to your servers or intercept your transfer of files. You also want to disable root login. This prevents someone from, if they compromise your SSH, from gaining full access to the server. And you also want to use Protocol 2 instead of Protocol 1 for SSH. Protocol 2 uses 3 separate protocols, separate transport, authentication, and protocol and connection protocol, whereas Protocol 1 does all within the same protocol. And then there's also known vulnerabilities with buffer overflows and weak encryption methods within Protocol 1 that Protocol 2 has eliminated, along with other feature enhancements as well. Best practices for Active Directory on Windows is to ensure the physical security of the Active Directory server, to manage the privileged accounts and groups. You do this by restricting access to the administrator groups and roles. You only grant privileged access when needed to for users, instead of automatically granting them privileged access instead of user access. And you also want to utilize the principle of least privilege whenever possible with user accounts. You would also want to utilize software management. This will automatically deploy software patches for the operating system and definition updates for antivirus and malware software. It also prevents users from disabling the security software on their computers. More best practices would be to avoid faulty configurations that expose Active Directory to risk. Some of these faulty configurations would be to prevent downloads of internet content and freeware utilities on the domain controllers, remove unnecessary applications and utilities on the domain controllers, avoid disabling security features on users' computers to where the users can't do that themselves, only an administrator can. Prevent the same password from being used multiple times within an Active Directory, and prevent installation of known programs with security vulnerabilities. And then you also want to monitor your Active Directory server for signs of compromise. How to implement best practices for SSH on Linux. When you're setting a strong password, here are some do's. You want to set your password length to 15 to 20 characters. This is a new standard by the United States Secret Service and the Department of Defense in their password length guidelines for 2016. Previously it was 8 to 12, but that just isn't secure enough anymore. Now, with that being 15 to 20 characters, you still have to use uppercase letters, use lowercase letters, use numbers, and use special characters. And you want to use a minimum of one of each of these arranged randomly throughout the word. Because if they're grouped together, like let's say you have 33 double exclamation point, it's actually easier to break than 3A, lowercase a, 9, uppercase A, because they are side by side. The setting of strong password don'ts. Don't use common names or spellings found in the dictionary, because that's a lot easier for hackers to crack if it's a dictionary password. Don't use family, friends, or pet names, because this can lead to social media and social engineering. Don't use dates. And don't tell anyone your password. You don't write down your password and leave it in the desk drawer or email it to yourself, because then if your email account gets compromised, well, then they know your SSH password. And don't reuse the same password from another login or website. To disable the root login, you open the terminal on the server, type /etc /SSH, press enter, type dir. This will bring up a directory of all the folders and files within the SSH folder inside of Etsy. You want to locate the name of the root login file. Once you've done that, you want to type vi and then the name of the root login file. And then once you've opened the root login file, you want to locate where it says permit root login, and you're going to change this to say permit root login no. Save the changes and close the file, and then reboot the server to implement the new settings. To use protocol 2 instead of protocol 1 for SSH, open the terminal on the server, type enable, type password if needed to log in and make the changes, type configure, terminal, type hostname followed by the hostname of the router, type IP domain -name and then the hostname of the router, type crypto key generate RSA, type IP SSH, type IP SSH version 2, save the changes and close the file. And once again, reboot the server as needed to implement the changes. How to implement best practices for the Active Directory. Ensuring physical security of the Active Directory server. You want to install it in a dedicated rack or cages away from other servers. This prevents anybody from accidentally booting it or putting a CD in and modifying it or trying to do something else to it thinking it's another server. And with it being in a dedicated rack or cage away from other servers, even if they all have the same key, then it won't make any difference. So you need to have a different key or other way of opening the rack or the cage. And you also want to utilize BitLocker drive encryption to encrypt and protect the hard drive contents from changing. So in case hackers do breach your Active Directory server, if the hard drive is encrypted, they can't make any changes to the Active Directory. To implement a least privilege administration, log in as administrator to the server, go to computer configuration, go to policies, go to Windows settings, go to security settings, go to local settings, go to user rights, and then enable or deny whatever applications that you want to for that group of users, and then save them. Utilizing software management, there are a number of third-party commercial softwares out there that will do this for you if you don't want to write your own script files on the server. And faulty configurations to avoid depends on which configurations concern you the most. There will be protocols and ways to check for each of these that can be built into the Active Directory. So depending on which one you want to check for will be how you do it. And then monitor your server for signs of compromise. This will be done by having a, once again, third-party commercial software or installing your own script, to monitor memory usage, user login use, user login failure, user attempts, stuff of that kind of information, and depending on what alerts you set, have it email you. These are the references that I used. Are there any questions?